So what are you doing? What are you doing?
I just got everybody's joining back in.
Okay, so
Are you at another meeting?
we're not quite apologies, y'all.
Good line.
Go ahead and.
How are you?
Oh no, not another one. Percy.
Madison instead. And so just logistical check-in. Apologies, I know I was in mid-sentence and it looks like Zoom crashed for everyone across the whole entire thing. So my staff chat is going haywire at the moment. So thank you for your flexibility. And I know they were in the middle of a question, right? Especially reflecting on the creative science program. But ultimately, I know Kellogg and Harrison Park might be places that we look at, but Kellogg would be opening first in 2021. And so now I'm back. The Southeast schools in phase 2 are also listed on our website and could give you a picture of maybe the next steps of how we're looking. And your feedback, especially on what we're doing, when it's happening, I think that's a heart of this discussion. And I know some Southeast Guiding Coalition members might be in here and could have some really good expertise to share for some of these questions. But I'll pause there and see if folks have thoughts or more questions.
I have some thoughts about transportation. It was mentioned as a common theme, and I'm a Glencoe parent, and getting sent to Madison just right off the bat is really kind of something hard to wrap my head around. We're closer to Franklin, Cleveland, and Grant. So I don't know if people are doing the radius from the schools, but 4 miles seems, in Northeast seems a big stretch for us that are in Southeast. So I don't know if you've gotten that feedback yet, but I expect that to be a common theme from Glencoe and Richmond parents specifically.
Yeah, I had a comment. I'm a Bridger parent, and for people that who aren't at Bridger might not realize that with this proposal, Bridger is essentially closing. And my concern is just with Bridger and I believe Lent, they both have pretty strong neighborhood programs. And my concern is that this proposal is shutting down neighborhood programs that are working well for a lot of people. So I would just like the coalition to consider maybe meeting these neighborhood programs halfway and not at this point completely swiping out neighborhood programs and filling them with DLI, because the impact of a neighborhood program extends beyond just the walls of the school. It extends to where people live. It extends to neighbors, a community, our city. So that was just the input that I wanted to share.
I would love to just jump in on these last few ideas because I am a parent and a teacher at Creative Science School, but I've been a teacher in the East County and through PPS, and we live in the Northeast. And so I'm not speaking as a parent of Creative Science, but we've been through this Northeast enrollment balancing for years. And I am wondering how we can connect the Northeast with the Southeast at this point, because CSS moving is the least of my concerns because I live in the Northeast, but I am wondering how we can balance people being close into their neighborhood schools, but also take a more holistic approach to the whole East Side balancing instead of taking this Northeast that never seemed to quite get finished or whatever it is, then move to the Southeast, which I know is crucial, move all these families around and then start to look at the Northeast again. So I just want to put it in there. Like, I don't want to be super vocal about it, but I'm just wondering how we can spend all this time and then start all over again in 2 more years after Kellogg's filled and all these families switch to break between middle schools and high schools, and then start to look at a random boundary of the Burnside split. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I'll jump in. I'm going to be vocal about it. There's 4 high schools in Northeast, and there's 2 in Southeast, and we're worried about overcrowding in Southeast without considering what we can do for Northeast. And I don't think it's very fair to adjust boundaries in Southeast without talking about how we can use underutilized space in Northeast, specifically Roosevelt, Jefferson. Grant's overcrowded. Let's look at Madison. There's lots of options, and we're trying to alleviate Southeast without taking into consideration what can be done with the facilities that are already in place. I'm a Glencoe parent. I don't think that it's fair that we're talking about middle school, high school alignment, and we're automatically changing our feeder system at the elementary level without considering elementary. I don't agree with that.
I'm a Woodstock parent, and I have 2 parents who are public school teachers, and I'm from Eugene, where there were 5 immersion programs for a town of 100,000 people at the time in the 1980s. And I didn't get to go to any of them, even though my parents were obviously very concerned about education and involved. And that's because my parents didn't have time to drive me to one of the immersion programs because it was too far from my house. And so I want to make sure, I know we're talking about equity, and I'm really curious to hear more about Bridger and how they feel about this, moving, neighborhood kids who aren't in the program out and then bringing in kids from far away. Because I feel like when we talk about equity and access, a lot of access, especially for young children, which is key time for them to mature and develop, is having that access close to their home. And with most parents having to work, both parents working, if not 1, if not 2 jobs in order to even afford a house in Portland, or to even afford an apartment in Portland. I'm a little bit worried that if we're asking all of the kids in the Mandarin immersion program to move and to be a driving distance away from their school, we're going to be creating a different kind of isolation and a different kind of access issue, especially for the middle class, which gets caught in between. The upper class can go to a private school. There's plenty of private immersion schools in town. But for people who can't afford that, you're getting stuck. And that's where I was growing up.
I would like to respond just really quickly. I'm a Creston parent. I don't have a neighborhood parent, but I do want to say from my observation of the data that was presented through this program or through this process is that the reasoning for moving the DLI programs is they are moving to where there's a greater concentration of native speakers for that population. And so if we're thinking about an equity from an equity standpoint, and the real purpose of the DLI programs is because a lot of research supports the idea that for heritage language speakers, having access to learning their native language simultaneously with learning their second language, which would be English, that's greater benefit for them ultimately. And so there's a greater concentration of Chinese language speakers and Spanish language speakers in the areas where they're proposing to move the DLI programs. And so I just think that that's something to remember and to consider when we're talking about equity. Like moving to the Woodstock neighborhood is something that, yeah, most people, if they're in lower middle class, they can't move to Woodstock to get their kids into those programs. And so if we're thinking about where does it make the most sense to have a Chinese language immersion program where it would best serve the native Chinese language speaking population, I think it's important to consider that.
Well, I'm Woodstock's parent, and oh, my kids go to Woodstock. I don't live in Woodstock, and I'm a Chinese parent. And for that point, they say there's more concentration at Harrison Park or Bridger, that which is not that much a true case, because there's actually a lot of parents living in Woodstock, this neighborhood, and also there's adopted parents from China. They want the kids continue the program. So when we saw they say the reason is because Harrison Park has some more Chinese, and that's why the reason they want to move there. And then we are shocked because a lot of parents we know it's not living there anymore. And if they do, then Harrison Park's enrollment won't be so low. Only have 13 kids this year in the Chinese DUI program. So if that's really the case, their program will be overflow. And my another question is, Woodstock Chinese Immersion Program is a really good program. I think one reason to make it so successful is because they are co-located. They're co-location, they're English, and then, but now the PPS said, no, it's not. It's bad, which I don't understand. They are so successful. They love it. We have an open house, and the parents from the neighborhood program, they support to have the mentoring program inside the school. And another point is on the slideshow that you two say it's going to create less transportation. But when we move to Woodstock's program to Bridger, that's really long. It's a really long drive for the Woodstock parents. We're not including some of the parents from the south of the Woodstock. That's defeat the purpose of them saying, because of the last transportation. Also, the Bridger doesn't have enough space. If they say they give people more chance to join the program for the DUI program, but Bridger doesn't have enough space for to expand the program for the mentoring program. I think they should do is keeping the Woodstock as it is, and then expand the Harrison Park to expand the Chinese program instead of moving Woodstock 100 parents to another school, and just for that reason.
I'm also a Woodstock parent, and I'd love to jump in here if I can. We feel exactly the same way. My wife is Chinese. We specifically moved to nearby. We didn't even move to the neighborhood, but we moved nearby because of this program and because we wanted our children to have this opportunity. And right now it is a very successful program. If you look up, Chinese immersion school just on Google, it's one of the top things that will come up in the very first page. It was one of the first in America. Again, we moved back here specifically for this program, and taking it and moving it doesn't make any sense. The school is almost exactly balanced between the neighborhood program and the Chinese program. There's a very strong culture of both programs. You walk through the hallways and it's not like a separate school within a school. There's, all of the artwork in English and in Chinese, and the every single year we have the talent show, and there are kids doing things in Chinese and kids doing things in English, and it's a absolutely wonderful mix, and it's part of what attracted us to the program. And I feel like trying to put all of the, and I don't know how it is with the Spanish families, but trying to put all of the kids who are studying that language into one program is a form of segregation as well. And I don't think that that's something that is strengthening for the school. The other thing that you brought up that I really have a problem with is, if one of the goals is to phase out or eliminate portable classrooms, moving both the Chinese DLI programs to Bridger doesn't do that. There's too many people for Bridger's facility, and we're going to end up having to continue using portable programs. So not only is Woodstock going to be under enrollment, which is against one of the goals, but we're going to be using portable classrooms, which is also against one of the goals. And I don't think that it necessarily creates equitable results. It's taking a very, very successful program and moving it away for really no purpose.
I'm another. Shanice, are you able to tell us what the issues that, like, why don't people want a school within a school? Because coming from Woodstock, it's hugely advantageous, I think, to the students who aren't in the Mandarin program. So where does that goal to remove that come from?
I'd also like to add on to that, what does school within a school mean? I don't understand that criteria.
That's a good question. I know that's come up a couple times as well, this language of co-located programs. And I know, especially with our dual language immersion programs, that might be occupied in the same building as a neighborhood school, will kind of fall into this category. And so I think that there are various impacts to co-located programs, especially looking at K-8. So for example, I know when there's the ability to have multiple strands or sixth grade teachers in a particular school, the ability to switch classrooms or create space or have offerings for students in a DLI program that might be different than occupying half of the building with a neighborhood school program. That kind of impacts the kind of resources or even the kinds of classes that might be available based off of how folks might be sharing space. And so there's impacts, right? Because some of y'all have real experiences with some of these programs and know what makes them successful and what helps you all and your students. And so that's a kind of a part of this conversation too, to hear exactly from your perspective on what's really working and how we can improve. But I think, and from that perspective, we really look at the co-location of programs. I think it's complex, and especially for folks and the different identities or in their access might experience transportation or different issues differently, even in the same program. And so kind of that nuance is difficult, but I think you all are in a great position to help us understand more deeper. But yes, we want to optimize the experiences students get in our schools and give them everything possible. And I think that at the end of the day, that's the goal of our work.
Hello, I'm a parent of a Woodstock Elementary student. I just wanted to say that the program has been fantastic, and part of what has made it so great is that it's very small and it's part of a sort of very fine-grained community. So it has one foot in a more intimate scale of the neighborhood, and that's been just like a fantastic part of that program, that small scale, that being locally rooted. I think sort of consolidating, bringing the elementary schools into sort of one point in the school, you lose a lot of efficiency. People obviously have to drive farther. Having two elementary schools just seems more, there's a lot of efficiencies in having two spots there. But I think at the elementary school age, to your point, I think, I think really the small intimate scale is what makes Woodstock so strong now. I don't think sort of consolidating this to get, more sort of resources for more specialized programs would necessarily be helpful, particularly at the elementary school level. But I wanted to speak real quickly to just like, the Woodstock Elementary Mandarin program has been around for 22 years now. So there's multiple businesses that are dependent on it being there. Just right across the street from Woodstock, there's a Mandarin speaking daycare facility and after school program, for instance. And it's become a very big part of the neighborhood. And I just wanted to say that it hasn't always been successful. Co-location, I think, was a bad word 10 years ago. And I speak to parents of kids who are now in high school that, some of them opted not to send their kids to Woodstock and warned us about lack of equity in the program. That has really seemed to have changed. As far as I haven't heard any of that sentiment from people in the neighborhood program or the immersion program. It really seems to be working, and I don't think it happened overnight. I think this program, it took 22 years to make it so fantastic. And I just think that it was an organic process. It took a lot of participation. It doesn't happen overnight. And so, this would just not be an instant win. Like, what we'd be doing here is we'd be starting over, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm a native transfer parent, a Woodstock DLI student. And so we don't even live in the Woodstock area, we live out further. So Woodstock is a great location to serve native students and families from inner Southeast and even the West Side. And to expect us to go even farther east to Harrison Park, it doesn't make sense. I think having the co-locations, you're able to serve more families across the city.
Shanice, can you talk about some of the limitations to creating more immersion programs, if that seems to be of interest or of need?
I appreciate that question. I know after the board adopted the racial educational equity policy, a lot of the programs kind of began after 2011. And so I think it's an excellent question that connects to enrollment balancing and is also kind of gets at the core of some of our work in the Office of Teaching and Learning. But I think community driving a new kind of creation of programs and your perspectives here in this very meeting, I think is an excellent place to raise if you're seeing value in a particular area of our community. But I'd say community essentially has driven this after this commitment the board made in 2011. And I think this kind of opportunity allows us to think system-wide, but ultimately our Office of Teaching and Learning kind of really leads and drives our DLI program management. But yes, if you're thinking or feeling something about where a better option or a new option might look like, I'm all ears.
I was just wondering if immersion teachers are more expensive, if there's a financial constraint to switching out to, again, give access, switching out some of the programs that are non-immersion into immersion programs, if the community is interested in that.
That's a good question. I think it might vary, and I don't want to speak on assumption. I'd love to kind of give a thoughtful answer on the cost associations and other things that would be needed to implement. But I do know that especially with the Student Success Act and other parts of our work with strategic planning, that we do see the value of this kind of instructional experience and want to respond if community is telling us there's an additional need. And so, yes, I think it's a complex question. I can find a more of an answer to, but no, we are sort of driven in these processes to make those kinds of decisions, and know the investment is really key and connected to our kind of strategic goals.
I'd say that the teachers are on the same contract as all the rest of the teachers. They don't cost more. It's difficult to hire for them though. And I think part of the reason the Office of Teaching and Learning would like to have more strands of immersion at the same school, is so that way there's it's easier to collaborate and do professional development, as well as it's easier to manage class size and under enrollment with limited number, with the difficulty in hiring.
I would echo both of what has just been shared. As an administrator who has experience like at a DLI middle school, and now I'm not currently at a DLI school, but having done staffing and having had to master schedule for a school with a DLI program, all of those things are valid. And no, teachers do not cost more, like immersion teachers do not cost more. They're all in the same contract, but they are harder to recruit, and we certainly want to retain them. And it is definitely beneficial for them to have other teachers to work with, other DLI teachers to work with. And I think the scheduling piece for students is also a big consideration, especially when you think about middle school and high school schedules. We don't want to track students. And so it is beneficial to have more strands of the same language program together. And that is a reason why there's interest in consolidating at the middle school and high school.
It's clear that there's a lot of different questions about what exactly is going on. And I'm wondering if I'm being really naive to think that these decisions are being made really hastily and without a lot of community involvement. And I'm feeling really a lot of pressure, like this is imminent, and I don't really know if a mandate has changed. Why does it feel like it's just so, people didn't even know what was going on, and now all the boundaries are changing without community involvement. And I don't know if maybe, is that a misconception on my part? Because I really feel like I don't have any grasp of all the changes that are being proposed and why there's only one or maybe two options being considered that seem pretty definite in that all the implications that they would have. Am I alone in this kind of, I feel like it's a transparency and process breakdown.
So many people are weighing in. Agreed. Yes, I think we're all feeling that, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, as a CSS parent, creative science, we feel like this just kind of got dropped on us very quickly. And
same with Glencoe.
I understand that that Kellogg needs to be filled, but how long have we known that Kellogg needs to be filled? Maybe there were some things that got, because of the pandemic, maybe there was a breakdown or something like that. But I feel like all the other subsequent decisions are really impactful. Anyway, I don't know.
I've been really trying to hear everybody, these other opinions, but I feel like I just need to weigh back in on this Northeast enroll. We did this 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and I was super involved and giving my input. And we knew Kellogg was opening. They had leveled it, they're building it. And I just feel like if we're gonna just look at these small areas, and I do, like, to backtrack, I have followed this. It's not a big shock. We know Kellogg was opening. We knew there was going to be changes, but after watching what happened in the Northeast, and there was the same systems, and then it was just left unfinished, and we still have over-enrolled schools and disproportionate high schools, and all of these Southeast plans are still affect the Northeast high school. So I'm like, why are we still looking at this as a shock when we knew it was coming and we still haven't solved the problem? So I just want to connect with that and know that I've been following it. I know it's not a shock, but it does need to be connected because we're all Portland. We're like the east side of Portland. It needs to be looked at together. So I'm going to keep saying that.
I appreciate y'all weighing in and consensus here, and it helps me understand where you're at. And yeah, I think that's very real, being in a pandemic and reflecting on what's really critical in front of us and what can be kind of more long-term. And Kellogg, and I know that pink box, and I'm gonna just send a link through the chat of the website that kind of has information, and ultimately you got there to find me, but I'm gonna send it through the chat. And there is a section that talks a little bit about our focus, looking at Kellogg in the schools that would essentially feed into it. So the elementary and middle schools right in that neighborhood. And what we do now and what we do in phase 2 is also feedback that we can bring to our Southeast Guiding Coalition, who makes basically this recommendation to discuss with the board. And could be really critical things that we lift to the top, because when I hear consensus that strong, that for me tells a message that that's something we need to do our diligence in bringing to the top, framing our learnings and next steps. And so I think there's an opportunity to look to at the implementation for Kellogg would be in 2021, and some of the other parts would be probably 3 years and following in terms of their implementation. So kind of looking at a very extended timeline, even with some of just our immediate focus.
Can you speak to the efforts for our native speaking communities? I feel really frustrated that materials were only just translated within the last, I think, week to 2 weeks. And I just would want to hear more about how you're getting the information from our native speaking populations that are going to now be really housed only in one area. I mean, how are native speakers going to be supported in the Atkinson district when we don't have a Spanish program? Are those families that are generally in a lower SES going to somehow find a way to get over the Lents across 82nd, across 205? Or I guess near 205? If you can speak to that, I'd really like to hear more. I don't see it on the website.
Apologies, on my end, it broke up just a little bit. If you could repeat the last part of your question.
Just more about the process for connecting with our native speaking communities. I really feel like the materials weren't translated until recently. And so how are they being brought into this conversation? What am I not seeing on the website to show to how you're getting to these options when those communities may have not even been brought to the table until recently?
Thank you for that question. And I know this website link that I just showed you is really launched for our open house today, but we have been kind of doing an iterative process to reach community that speak multiple languages and in a few different methods, and calling them on the phone is feeling like the most promising, way that we've been able to connect. So through surveys, but really the phone calls, we're able to participate more with a wide range of folks. And in addition, we'll have kind of these touch points like focus groups and other discussions to follow that will impact how we revise all of what we're discussing tonight. And so I think there's absolutely some room to continue doing that work and also reaching our community partners who we met with actually a couple days ago, and will continue to wrap into our steps in the process.
It sounds like you're kind of winding us down, and I'm wondering if you can say what your top takeaways are from the comments that you've heard tonight. Like, what are you going to report back from this group?
I appreciate that. And I'm here for 30 more minutes, but I can also kind of share what I've heard. I know the chat feature, we've got a big hearty group of 100 of y'all. And so a part of the next steps is taking all of the notes that we're seeing in this chat, in addition to what you shared with us tonight. But I think a lot of themes, right, have surfaced, and we are really grappling with the impact of co-located programs, and especially as they connect to specific school communities, and thinking about program movement, creating inequity with transportation, and just continuity. So I think that there is an opportunity to reflect and can share as a result of the breakout room. We'll have bringing all of this data that we're hearing from you in the comments, especially to our Southeast Guiding Coalition. And we'll have an opportunity to weave that together. And so those are also public meetings where we'll kind of take this process and continue. But yeah, I think that middle school and high school alignment really being connected to elementary school, and ultimately thinking about the comprehensive impact beyond Southeast. But yeah, it would be unfair of me to summarize comments in 2 minutes because I think I have a lot more to say about what I've heard. But those are some of hot takes, I'll call them.
Can I ask a question about the bonding votes that have come through? Some of the bonds that have come through and the voting has been made to provide improvements to facilities. But with what I'm hearing is that there's really facility shortfalls. So not enough facilities or adequate facilities for the population. So within the bond strategy, why wasn't that thought of and, proposed in some of the voting? And is that a future plan as we move forward?
That's a good question. And I think there's 2 parts to that response. I think a bond absolutely will create more building capacity that will really benefit students across our system. But long-range facilities planning is this basically an initiative that looks at almost a 20-30-year time period of how we might think about these very same issues and how built spaces really impact the instructional experiences for students. And so there'll be a community process for that actually starts this year. And so there's an opportunity, I think, to influence some of these connected issues with addressing the core infrastructure of our PPS buildings. And our bond will help us kind of continue that work. But ultimately, yes, the long range facilities planning, I would say, is maybe this thing that connects to thinking more comprehensively about other opportunities we can use for buildings.
Thank you.
I have something. Oh, go ahead.
I would like to ask a question about whether some of these goals are more important than others. It seems like this process was started to balance enrollment, and yet it doesn't balance. Franklin is still significantly over-enrolled on this scenario. And Atkinson, I believe, is left at about 30% capacity. I'm not sure why you would remove a track from a school and leave it with such low capacity. I am also wondering, I'd be interested to know whether the plan would be to close some neighborhood elementary schools under this program if they're left so underutilized. And the other thing I wanted to say is that some seem to be very over capacity. My understanding is that Bridger only has room for 2 tracks unless they use mobile classrooms, which my understanding was the goal was to get rid of those. And also, I believe that Lent is slated for the 4 tracks of Spanish immersion, but that it would need to use mobile classrooms as well in order to have that capacity.
I'd like to speak to a point that was brought up previously. Somebody asked how are native speakers feeling about these scenarios, and I wanted to share that I attended the Spanish language focus group last night. I'm bilingual. I am not part of Latinx community, but my child is in DLI, and I think it's a testament to our community at Atkinson, where my child goes, that we support each other. And I found that the meeting was very concerning. The parents at this meeting are feeling very like their voices have not been heard. The coalition website was only translated into Spanish this week, so they are just hearing of this information, many of them, especially during a pandemic when people are not as connected in their community as they may have been if they were attending school in person. The word segregation, isolation, racism were used in how they felt about this scenario. And to me, I just feel like I have to speak up and represent them, because many of them are not in this room. And when I hear also, people speaking for them, as far as, perhaps suggesting that a certain population lives in a certain area, therefore that's a better place for that population, I really think we need to be careful and be listening to those voices. The Spanish language focus group was a place for that, and I appreciate that the coalition allowed that to happen. There needs to be more of that, because these are pretty serious concerns for this community and for their children. So I think that's an important thing to consider. I appreciate that.
And Julia, thank you for bringing that up. I'm also not a native speaker. My wife is, and we were in the Chinese group on Tuesday, and I do understand Chinese. There were about 55 people in the group. And for some of them, this wasn't the very first time hearing it, but none of the options had been really translated to them. So for many of them, the very first time they heard about it was in the local Chinese newspaper. And that was something that came out last week. And so there was a lot of those exact same words, segregation. They're trying to segregate us. They don't want us to be with, white students or native speakers or whatever. And that's a serious, I think that's a serious issue. And it's part of what makes the program attractive for a native speaker is maybe I'm an immigrant like my wife is, and this is the very first time,
Segregation and sibling
I
separation.
can't be in America, I can't become an American, but my child can. My child can integrate and understand and be part of the culture and learn inside the culture. And I think that's something that we're not really looking at. And I think looking at demographics there's a lot of Chinese people living here, without looking at the language, without looking at the culture, without looking at any of those things is a real problem. And, somebody was talking about how near 82nd, a lot of the people there are Cantonese speaking Chinese, and we have no programs for Cantonese at all. And that's a problem in Portland Public Schools. But they're not necessarily putting their children in the Mandarin program. Harrison Park doesn't have very many students in its program at all right now. So anyways, the segregation point I think is really important. And I don't think that the actual Chinese native speaking population is being heard, nor, the phone call thing, I don't know that any of them said they got a phone call. Most of them were talking about getting the news from the newspaper.
I'm really hearing a theme here that parents are not really jazzed about segregating the language programs from the English programs. Am I hearing that correctly?
I would agree, and I would also like to chime in that we have several parents, not several, many parents who have signed a letter with our school talking about some of these issues, and it's neighborhood and immersion. It's both. I mean, many of our neighborhood parents feel that the diversity in our school is what makes it so great for their children, and they want that. And I think that's important. But I really do think the more important overarching theme here is that underserved populations are saying this feels wrong to us, this feels like segregation, and we need to listen to that.
Yeah, I just want to say that I asked about this with the district and was told that students in English programs and co-located programs, my son didn't get into the Spanish program at Bridger. They perform poorly. But what can we do to make sure they don't perform poorly and we can keep this integration of this diversity of language and students and be close to our neighborhood schools?
You know, I would love to speak to that too, because I've spoken as a CSS parent who is not advocating for that building, but I am a regular. Our neighborhood school is regular. We live equally distant to Harvie Scott. We have gone through turmoil before my child, who's 13, the 7th grader, went to elementary school because of some of these DLI situations. And I do think the segregation is a huge aspect to consider, but also to only leave a small portion of the school left on an English side has done a huge disservice to the rest of our underserved population that is in our neighborhood. If you restrict it too much and there's only certain classrooms that are available, it has become like there's nothing that can be done for the children, the students who come from underserved populations that aren't native Spanish speakers, that don't qualify to go into the DLI. They have no other option except to go into overcrowded classrooms. And it took this full almost 20 years for Rigler to even figure it out. So I think it's something to consider with that. Is the segregation is an issue, but I think with a proper mindset of it, it can give better services to the students in the DLI program.
Hi there. I hope it's okay if I chime in here for a second. My daughter started at Atkinson and is now at Mount Tabor, and we moved closer to Mount Tabor. And so this would actually put us going to Madison. It would make it so that she is not going to be going to school with any of her friends. They would all be going to Franklin while she would be going to Madison. We've made a lot of decisions to stay close to the neighborhood in our move so that we can not be, we've thought about moving to Bend, Oregon, but we've decided to stay because her network and the community is so important to us. And so I'm going to express I feel like I need to get on. I'm actually angry about this, and I need to express that I'm angry a little bit. It just really feels like a shakeup in a way that feels like it would destabilize our community in a way at such a difficult time in life right now that I think would be not good for our family. So I just need to express that it's something that we're really not happy with at all. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks for listening.
Ms. Clarke, could you please address the slide that was in your YouTube presentation that shows now a new phase 1 for the Mandarin immersion program going to Bridger and then to Franklin? I think this is the first that the Mandarin immersion program parents of older kids have heard about this. And now it says it's slated for August 2021, when we've already received letters from, Cleveland High School for my son, for example, saying he's going to the Mandarin immersion program there. Can you address this new change that I saw on the slide, please? Thank you. Thanks for being here too.
No, it's a good question for clarification's sake as well. And so what we're kind of looking at is basically an idea that we're taste testing with community, but in no way is a final change or something that's being implemented at this time. And so I know in January, we'll get to a point where we get closer, but I think you're asking good questions. The place that makes sense for you to access these programs, especially currently reflecting on your experience as things that we want to take note of as we reflect on the impact. But ultimately, I know from week to week, the Southeast Guiding Coalition is kind of refining configurations and seeing what might work and what doesn't, and really can't do that without y'all's thought partnership. And so I'm seeing this as something that's going back for revision and change and review. And so I would set the expectation that this isn't a final product, but we'll be able to get closer with these thoughts and priorities that we're being able to listen to throughout the evening.
So I wanted to respond to that, and I see people, or at least one person responding in the chat too. The taste tests, or these things that are getting floated, have a huge impact on all of the schools that are represented here and more, I'm sure, and all the communities that are represented here and more. And they cause a lot of stress as people try to figure out what's going on what looks like a really short time frame and what looks pretty formalized. Doesn't look like it's a taste test, isn't really expressed like that. And I have a 4th grader, so we've only been in PPS, this is our 5th year. And time and time again, I feel like there's there's a strong need to consult the people who are going to be most impacted at the beginning of a process and get their input before plans are formalized. And instead it's done the other way around. Plans are put together and then everybody has to react. And it causes divisions between schools. It causes divisions within schools. It brings out the worst of us instead of the best of us. And I especially appreciate the people who are being the comments from the people who are being told this is to serve communities that they represent and are saying this does not serve my community. And so obviously those communities were not consulted in the beginning like they could have. And I know we're in the middle of a pandemic year, but as somebody noted in the chat, here we all are on Zoom. The district has all of these resources, has liaisons for different communities, has translators. And so it is wild that this, with just this many meetings left and talking about things that are going to start affecting families this fall, that it's happening this way. And I'm not wanting to put that all at your feet, Ms. Clarke, but I would like you to convey that message, because I feel like I'm not the only person who feels like that based on other comments. And we don't feel like this is a taste test. We feel like we are trying to figure out what to do. And for some people, where are kids going to school next year? And for some families who talked about, and I do not consider myself one of the most impacted. I'm white. I'm not one of the communities that has spoken up saying this is supposed to serve me and it's not. So I want us to center what they're saying, but it cannot feel like a taste test to them if they are telling you at this stage in the game that this feels like segregation. Thanks.
I'd like to say something if I could. My name's Christine. I'm a Japanese immersion parent, and my daughter's at Mount Tabor right now. So I completely understand where a lot of the parents are coming from, especially the DLI segments of this group here. You know, there's a lot of buy-in and a lot of it's just a lot when you enter into these DLI programs. It's a big investment and a huge commitment. So I totally get that. And I will admit that 3 or 4 days ago when I heard, or a week ago, whenever it was that I heard of this proposal, I really bristled at it. And I was like, well, we made this commitment to the district to, we had to make all these commitments to whatever. And I felt like the district was kind of not keeping its commitment to us, because I had entered thinking my daughter would go to Grant High School and that it was kind of a done deal. But I gave it some thought and was thinking about this from, an equity lens, really. And one thing that I've really not been happy with the JDLI program at Richmond, on up, is the lack of diversity, racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically. And I know that a lot of people in neighborhood schools all over the district and, people who weren't able to get into JDLI programs feel that there's like this, that it's I understand the school within a school thing. Richmond does not have a neighborhood program at the school, but I can absolutely understand that sentiment. I could see that being a thing in some places. And, the more I've thought about this, I hear what everybody's saying, and believe me, I completely understand. But the more I've thought about it, the more excited I am about this idea of my daughter going on to Madison instead of Grant. I guess I just feel like if the purpose of the district has had this mission to rebalance, based on enrollment and numbers within the city, but especially based on equity, like for 10 years, but especially given things that have been going on, or things have been going on for a long time, frankly, but things that have been really at the forefront in the news and our society, and our kids are, vividly aware of these things right now. And there's a real, I guess how I've been identifying what I was feeling is like a NIMBY kind of feeling, like, yes, I'm all for equity and all for balancing, and just not in my backyard, or just why don't you wait until my kid graduates and then switch these, do the re-enrollment. And, I just don't feel that that's right. And I feel like a lot of the people engaging right now, all across these workshops, I'm not saying specific to this group, but the people who really engage in these processes have a lot to say, and we're all very opinionated. But really, I think there's a drastic underrepresentation of the people who these balancing and equity measures are most meant to serve. And so, yes, there's a ton of voices coming out tonight saying this is doing a disservice to my community or that community, my children. But I think in the end, it's going to be uncomfortable for people, and that's okay. As far as I'm concerned, that's okay, because if you're thinking long-term and big picture for Portland Public Schools and what role we will play in a greater community outside of Portland Public Schools, I think this is a good move for the district, and I am in support of it.
I think that's all fine and good if you actually ask the communities that you claim you're wanting to help. I mean, I think that's the whole point, is that there's a large group of Mandarin speaking families who are really unhappy that everyone just assumed this was going and decided what would be good for them, and assumed that this is what they were going to want because it would be good for them, and that they would want these things to be in their neighborhood, and nobody talked to them. I mean, I moved to Woodstock because Woodstock's my neighborhood school. Frankly, I'm trying not to get too attached to the idea that we might, not too upset about the idea that we might be somewhere else. If in fact you can show me that there is a benefit to the Chinese community that they want. But I read the same proposal and I thought, this is great. Like, this makes sense. We should put these schools where the speakers are. It turns out that's not right. And a bunch of, people outside of the community making that decision for a community without getting their input is not, it's what Portland does. So I think it's a bad idea to make these decisions and act like it's going to rebalance without actually talking to the communities that we're supposedly helping.
I'm just going to weigh back in real quick about that, because I've been through the Northeast again. I want it to be heard. I don't see any comments about it. I'm a Northeast family in a Southeast coalition, but we did this for 10 years and we didn't ever find a balance. We didn't hear from the communities that have been historically underserved. and decisions were left open and left honestly to the most vocal white families that wanted to hear it. So I just want to keep putting it out there. This is not a Southeast thing. It is right now, but it should be part of the Northeast. So I'm going to keep coming back in and advocating for the people who are not here in my neighborhood that have not been, their needs have not been met.
In that Spanish breakout session yesterday, there was one comment by a gentleman who said that the faces that he saw at the meeting were not those of his community. He said the people that actually attend the school didn't have the ability to be at that meeting because they either didn't know, or they didn't have the time to be able to do that, or they didn't have a computer. And it was just truly heartbreaking to think that, just reiterating what, but in that meeting yesterday, I know Julie, I saw you there, and Jamie, you know, just, it was sad when he was saying that they don't even know what's happening, and it was kind of heartbreaking.
And that's the only reason I'm back in. I don't want to take over the conversation. I just want to keep advocating. These are my neighbors. This is not the school we attend, and it's been so hard. Like we support them all, and it's just starting to come to be better, but I just want that voice to be heard that is not as part of the main conversation.
If I may, I'd like to read something from 724 in the chat. It's from Fan Zong. They say, I don't think my mic is working. I am a Chinese American with a kid in Woodstock already, and another incoming the next school year. I grew up in Chicago and have witnessed the effects of segregation. It's taking decades, and the feel of segregation is still present. This is very frustrating to me. What you're proposing is essentially pushing all the minority programs outside to the 82nd. This is the beginning of segregation, and if not stopped, can lead to some serious problems in the future of Portland. If we're just going to make sure all voices are heard, that one's been working on me, because if their mic isn't working, they need to be heard. So, and that is a Chinese American parent with a kid in the Woodstock neighborhood. Thank you for letting me interject.
I just wanted to say, I don't know if people can hear me. Yeah, okay. That it seemed like I read through my name's Danica. I have a child who's going to go into kindergarten next fall. I used to be a PPS teacher. This kind of thing in PPS is so not new, and it's 2020, and it's just disturbing. I mean, you can just even listening to the Nice White Parents podcast, I mean, the same story is going on, right? And there's some resolution there. But basically what I wanted to say is that I really appreciate everybody's input and Ms. Clarke's facilitation. But I just wanted to say that early on in the report about the phone surveys, it says that people feel like segregation is happening, that families who are Native speakers were much less aware of this process. And my question to Portland Public is, why didn't you stop the process then? You can't just continue with the same process and then think that something different is going to happen. And I think that's really, like, I would just love to see the district say, hey, we made a mistake. We need to do this differently. We're going to have to put off our personal goal, our institutional goals, to try to serve the families that we're serving. And I know that's complex. I'm an educator, I understand, but I feel like in this moment in time, you know, if we're just going to operate out of expediency and cultural values that are traditionally white supremacist culture and try to say that we're going to do something different, we're not going to. And so I would just love to see the process stopped in a way so you can find a different way to listen to the families that are most impacted. Thank you for listening.
I appreciate your comment, and I've been really reflecting on what y'all are sharing, especially this link between this not being successful without the engagement of communities, our multilingual communities. And, it's part of my responsibility to bring what I hear to the Guiding Coalition. And I know other folks on my team at the district want to make sure we're communicating with our board about what we're hearing this evening in the concerns, top concerns about what we're focusing on right now. And so part of our next steps will be two things: continuing to bring that this rich discussion back to our Southeast Guiding Coalition, but another step of just directly updating our board. And so I can name that something I have learned since beginning focus groups this week that we need to do maybe a little bit quicker than at the end of the process. And so hopefully kind of getting community perspective in places where folks are aware of where we need to stop or pause will be kind of my responsibility to communicate. I know we are running short on time and there's so many folks here and really good perspectives, especially as we reflect on these complexities. And, I'll name too, as your facilitator working here, I know the impact of sharing feedback from families or students. It can be difficult, right? And feels vulnerable to be open about your perspective in such a big space. So I know we have a few minutes left. I want to invite folks who might not have been able to speak yet to share thoughts. And regardless, the chat's being saved. And I'll also share a link through the chat of other places to capture last minute thoughts after we leave.
Is it just a speak up, raise your hand and speak up kind of version?
That works.
Okay, thanks. I was a little late, I apologize. I just want to make one comment, and maybe it's already been made, and so if it has, I apologize since I wasn't here when it started. I just have I want to say thanks to all the staff that are working on this and everybody that's working on this boundary proposal. It's got to be difficult, I'm sure. I am a planner by trade, so I understand the process and how hard it is to make these decisions. Having said that, I think I just want to go on record and say that, even though this may impact our family specifically, it's not really about that. And I understand that the goals are being laid out. What I am concerned about is child safety and access to schools. And as children go to school via bike and walking, and the district has policies in place that want to encourage biking and walking, particularly in middle school and high school. There are neighborhoods, i.e. the South Tabor neighborhood where we live, that's being broken up into 3 distinct areas for middle schools currently under the proposal. And it's forcing kids to make tough decisions about how they get to school across 82nd, Division, et cetera. And I have to say, I think that's just really not a good approach, particularly if your own policies and PPS say they want less cars on the road, less cars going to schools, and they want kids to be able to safely access it. So I just want to go on record again as saying an entire neighborhood where a middle school exists should have access to that middle school. It makes for safe access for all the children in that neighborhood. And I think it's an equity issue to some extent as well, that some kids are being asked in a single neighborhood to travel across 2 major arterials to go to their middle school when other kids just a block away are not. And I'm not sure how that really makes a lot of sense. Now, I do understand it's imperfect and you cannot designate those boundaries, perfectly. But when you have neighborhoods together, I think there's something to be said for keeping that available. So I just want to put that on record. Thank you.
There were Woodstock DLI parents who said that they moved to the Woodstock area specifically to get their children into the DLI program with their native speakers. And so I think if the program is consolidated to East Portland, then that will continue to encourage those native speaking families to move out there instead of integrating with the rest of the city. So that's segregation there, looking at the long term.
I'd like to ask how feedback like this is going to be captured in the future. If there's only 3 more coalition meetings, are you planning to have more of these? It seems like they've been really evidence of agreements upon many factors of DLI, transportation, communities unheard. How are you going to capture this feedback if we don't have more of these sessions planned yet?
Yes, so this is definitely not the final stop with our engagement with especially students and families impacted in the process. And so I know we have like immediate in December coming up some space with our Southeast Guiding Coalition to kind of take all of the feedback and apply it. But we want to be able to continue working with community in the ways that we are right now. And so we will continue to kind of share, especially on this website, what opportunities that will be presented in the future. And know we also work collaboratively with departments or our schools who might want to have a unique, smaller session. And so if that's something I'm hearing, especially that's of interest to certain school communities, we can kind of talk about what that could look like and would be a great idea to share in our comments / there's a stay involved section of that website. But yes, great question. And I'll hang out for a couple more minutes. I know it's a big group and we're just at 8 o'clock now, but I want to provide some space, especially for folks who might not have gotten a chance to share something they're sitting with.
I also want to mention that a lot of parents I have talked to, they say if the Woodstock program has moved out of Woodstock, they will drop the kids out of the program. And that's a lot of parents planning to drop out of the program. That's going to hurt the immersion program greatly. And also the parents' concern that lots non-Chinese parents will drop the kids off the Chinese program because they moved to Chinese program only. That would make the Chinese program become more only Chinese family. And that's not really what Chinese parents want, because we want to, yes, we do want the kids to learn Chinese, but we also want to play in the culture and continue to, with the neighborhood kids.
One other thing that I'd like to say, this is Christine from the Japanese immersion program, and I agree with a lot of what people are saying, but I also kind of disagree in the end with supporting this proposal. I just wanted to say that, when I signed up for the dual language immersion program with my daughter, one of the commitments that we had to make at Richmond, and I assume is the same for other immersion programs or magnet programs, is that you commit to getting your kid to school. And, that has been a hardship. And I can see why the district, in terms of equity, would like certain programs to be in certain neighborhoods. But I just kind of did want to bring that up for you, Shanice, I think was your name, that, we do make a commitment to be responsible for our own kids' transportation to and from school when we sign up for an immersion program. So that was part of the deal. And most people in the Japanese immersion program, I mean, a lot, I don't know about most, but I think most are coming from different neighborhood catchment areas.
All right, y'all. I know there is a lot of rich discussion tonight, and I know personally, both through our discussion and the chat, that there's a lot of things that will really help us. And so one thing I just want to reiterate too, we're kind of grappling with things feeling final and formal. And I definitely want to help communicate that we are taking your feedback to make sure we change things in ways that are responsive, more responsive to what folks are telling us. And so the advocacy and time that you've been taking out to participate in this process is really going to help us improve and make it better. And I'll send one more time through the chat just a way to stay connected to us and continue to work with us. And we'll also be doing our part and continuing to create opportunities where folks can weigh in and shape this work with their lived experiences and thought partnership. And so that is all for tonight. I think I've got a lot of work to do, and I appreciate hearing from all of you. And if you didn't get something out, I'll share my email through the chat. So you can reach me personally if you don't have, oh no, that's not my email, autocorrect. We'll try that one more time. That's my correct email. And so feel free to reach me directly if you have more perspective to share, but no, the chat has been saved. And so that will be a part of what we bring forward as well. Have a good rest of your nights, everyone. And I hope that you stay connected with us in our next steps.
Thank you very much, Shanice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shanice, and all the other parents.